has been very active in reviewing the environmental impacts of this proposed project by Enbridge, and so we thought he would be a really good person to share this information with the group here. So I'll leave it at that. John, thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi, I love it when somebody else talks about me because it makes it sound like I actually know what I'm doing. So you'll learn that maybe all that is not a little misleading, but I was wondering, I'm just kind of aiming for 20 minutes, but I might go as long as half an hour. Is that okay? Could somebody give me a flag when it gets to like 20 minutes? Sometimes I get carried away and lose track of time. So, so I guess with that, I will start. I've got a number of slides and I'll sort of talk through those. And then at the end, I'm thinking, you know, normally in a talk, I would invite people to ask questions during the talk, but I think communication sometimes over this format is a little difficult. So maybe save the questions to the end, questions and comments and booze and whatever. And then
John, if I can just interject, people could also add questions to the chat if they come up during the presentation.
Yeah, I probably will not see the chat myself. So if somebody else wants to raise a question, they'd have to alert me to the chat during the talk.
Yeah, or we can just save them for the end.
Okay, well, sounds good. I'm going to share my screen and try to get this going here. Okay, I heard a rumor that I was talking about environmental impacts of the Line 5 reroute. I'm going to talk about a much smaller subset of that. I'm going to talk about the impacts to small streams and our effort at monitoring small streams in the path of the Line 5 reroute. It's pretty specialized, but we think it's key to understanding the impacts of a long linear project like this. First, I want to give you a little bit of my background. As was mentioned, I work for the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. My interest in small streams reaches back a long time. I grew up partly in West Virginia, and about 25 yards in front of our house is a trout stream. When I grew up, I didn't really know what a trout stream was, but we really love that stream. And I'm a crappie fisherman, so I never did much fishing in there, but we did just about everything else, including drinking the water and swimming and rafting and everything else. So really fell in love with small streams. More recently, my son has really shown what a great trout stream that is and caught some near record trout in that stream, state record, West Virginia state record trout. And this is him inspiring me to study Tyler Forks. So he found a really great spot on the Tyler Forks River. Some of you might be familiar with it. I'd be surprised if you weren't. It seemed to be a really good spot. He was catching a number of trout there. One of the really good experiences I had with trout streams was an opportunity to map out one of the trout streams that the state of Wisconsin had overlooked in their mapping. Javorsky Creek had a big gap in it. Javorsky Creek is in the Pinocchio Hills. When we were looking at the proposal to develop iron mining in the Pinocchios, we really looked at a lot of the small streams there, and we noticed that there was part of the trout stream was missing from state GIS coverages and state mapping. And so one winter, my son and I, years ago, we went out and walked that creek and recorded the path of that creek using GIS, and eventually that got incorporated into the state database of trout streams. So it's the green stream there, trout stream, class 1 trout stream. And so that was pretty gratifying. But like I said, I'm a crappy fisherman. I don't do much fishing, but I sure like small streams. So And a little bit background about GLIFWC. I think most of you have heard of GLIFWC, but it is a natural resource agency for 11 Chippewa tribes that ceded territory to the federal government in treaties in 1836 to 1854. GLIFWC, or Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, manages and studies and protects natural resources within those ceded territories so our member tribes can harvest those resources. My focus has really been on water quantity and water quality. A lot of it has had to do with mining, but there are a lot of other things that have been impacting water quantity and quality in the Great Lakes region. And this is an example of a real erosion problem created by simply improper use of a seasonal road that was used during exploration drilling when the road wasn't frozen, created a real siltation problem, runoff into Trout Creek, actually Javorsky Creek, the creek that my son and I mapped. So we worked with the state of Wisconsin to try to get better erosion control on that. Ultimately, the company had to resurface this road with gravel so that it was able to withstand their use. Another aspect of water quantity that we've been looking at is excessive water being pumped into some aquatic ecosystems in Minnesota from iron mines. This is a county road in up in the Iron Range in Minnesota. County road's been flooded for about 50 years because of huge amount of water discharging from iron mine tailings basins. Those basins are designed to discharge water through their berm. That water ends up in surrounding wetlands, and this county road went through a wetland area and has been flooded since the mine started operating back in the 80s, 1980s. So that's my son wading through there. I'd say it's about 3 miles of road that's flooded out. A lot of our focus is on water quality. We do sampling at about 20 sites across the ceded territories in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, where we collect water samples and take readings. We do grab samples from, this is a very small creek in north of the Marquette area near the Eagle Mine in the UP. And those samples are sent to a lab in Stevens Point where they're analyzed for about 25 different parameters, mostly metals and other chemicals that might be released by ground disturbance or mining in particular. We also do a lot with, particularly on smaller streams, taking field measurements with field meters. And something that has turned out to be particularly useful, we've been putting, since 2011, we've been putting meters in streams where the loggers stay in the streams and we pull them out of the stream once or twice a year and download them. They have little sensors that record temperature and specific conductance and record that every half hour. So we get a near continuous record of those two parameters of water characteristic. That lets us look at patterns over time. So we have here on the top is water specific conductance. On the bottom is temperature. You can see 2 summers of data. And in this part, there are 2 different loggers actually plotted here. And then over the winter, the water temperature gets down to near 0, stays very close to 0. And then we have specific conductance, the pattern of specific conductance over that same 2-year period. We've been able to correlate this with other parameters that we collect through grab samples to really see the tremendous fluctuation in water character that occurs on a 24-hour basis and weekly and monthly basis. Really been surprised at the fluctuations in water chemistry that we see through this near continuous monitoring. more locally, we've been working in the Pinokies for, I guess, since about 2010. We have we work with USGS. We have a stream gauge on Tyler Forks that records flow and also some very basic water chemistry. So that's online, and we're setting up some additional online data logging around the state, but that's not online yet, but we're hoping to in the next year to get that online. So specifically related to the Line 5 reroute, I just thought, I think most of you probably are aware of what this reroute is, but you can see going across from east to west here, the existing pipeline going through the Bad River Reservation. Enbridge is proposing to reroute that line around the reservation through the uplands here, partly through Iron County Forest, just to the south of Copper Falls State Park. Some of the areas over here are ag lands, but what you can see is it's cutting through a lot of small tributaries to some of the larger rivers. Now this map shows some of those tributaries, but it doesn't show all of them. But I'll give you sort of an overview of what that project looks like in terms of crossing streams and wetlands. That reroute is about 41 miles of new pipeline through Ashland and Iron County. They're documented by the company, enbridge, 186 stream crossings. We actually think they're more like 200 because we think enbridge overlooked a number of stream crossings. But of the 186 stream crossings that enbridge identified, the Army Corps has looked at those and said that 40 of them are not regulated streams. They say they're too ephemeral to be regulated, and therefore there's no permitting required for those streams. They're looking at another 10 to determine whether they will be regulated by Federal Clean Water Act. There are 875 wetland crossings by the pipeline route. 200 of those crossings, the Army Corps claims, are not regulated, and they still have to make a determination on 46 of those crossings. Now, the stream crossings and wetland crossings, and whether they're regulated or not, protected by federal regulations, is really interrelated, because wetlands are protected under federal law if they're connected to larger water bodies by streams. Well, if the streams aren't regulated, then those streams don't connect the wetlands to the larger water bodies. So the protection of wetlands and streams is interrelated and unrelated. If wetlands are not connected to larger water bodies, they're isolated wetlands, and they are unregulated, and they receive no federal protection, and they don't need to be mitigated for by the company. So we're really concerned about, in particular, the Army Corps' claim that a significant portion of these streams and wetlands are not under federal jurisdiction. Now, I was glad to hear that there was a lawyer on this call, because a lot of these things end up being kind of legal issues. There's a new waters of the US law that was pushed through, went into effect in, I think, June. And that identifies what waters are regulated under the Clean Water Act. We think the Army Corps is currently misapplying the Clean Water Act over the waters of the US rule, and is excluding waters that should be under federal jurisdiction. So, kind of address that question, we started looking at some very small streams along the route that is going to be followed by the pipeline. This is actually one of the larger small streams that we looked at, but that red stick there is actually a makeshift yardstick. So it's 3 feet. 3 feet is about, most of the streams that we're looking at are narrower than 3 feet. And I would be very surprised if there are any fish in any of the streams that we're looking at. But these streams feed into a lot of larger streams that support trout. So I'm sure I'm not telling you anything. This is a map made by Bad River, just mapping out the trout streams in the watershed. And so the darker blue lines are designated trout streams. There are a lot of trout streams in this watershed. And what we're interested in is all the little feeder streams that go into those trout streams. So in this slide here, what I'm showing is the pipeline right-of-way in gray, crossing the landscape. It crosses a number of trout streams, but in this slide, only one, which is in green. So the trout streams are in green, and those are the larger streams on this landscape. But there are all these small feeder streams that are unmapped and generally undocumented. This stream network we developed by modeling the flow of water across the landscape using a digital elevation model. So Don White, that I work with at GLIFWC, used GIS software to model these stream channels. In some cases, these are extremely small streams that might flow only for a few days or a few weeks during the year, but they're really the capillaries that feed into the larger streams and rivers and support the aquatic ecosystems. So we're trying to push the Corps to protect as many of those small feeder streams as possible. I'll show some more pictures of the kinds of streams we're looking at. Here's another one, very shallow. This is during spring snow melt, which should qualify it for federal protection, because a stream flowing during snowpack melt qualifies as a water of the US, but we're having a hard time convincing the Corps of that. And so here's some other of these small streams. Some of them have more defined channels than others. But all of the ones we've looked at flow for at least several weeks in the spring during spring snow melt, and we think probably flow for quite a bit longer, probably several months of the year. Unfortunately, documenting that sort of thing is pretty difficult. So here's one with a fairly defined stream channel. So as part of this effort to document these very small streams and bring them forward to the Army Corps for consideration, we have been taking photographs, documenting their location, recording whether there's flow or not, and recording, tracking down weather conditions during the site visit and also for several days prior to the site visit, to document whether these streams are simply flowing in response to precipitation or are they more permanent than that. So we've been passing this information on to the Army Corps. The Army Corps seems to be reluctant to accept this information. I'm a little mystified why, but I think it's because it's a little different from what they've been dealing with in the past. In the past, snow melt and snowpack melt didn't necessarily qualify a stream for classification as water of the US. It required, in most cases, some groundwater flow, base flow. That's no longer a requirement of the waters of the US rule. So I don't know if the top of your screen's cut off, but the top of mine's cut off. What this said is data and observation needed on small streams. We started collecting information on small streams to document their flow and their character. We're going to be doing that again starting in the spring. In fact, this weekend I'm going out and we're putting trail cameras on streams to get multiple pictures per day of whether those streams are flowing or not, to try to adequately document them for the Army Corps so that they can receive federal protection. But what we're trying to record is certainly any records of fish or other aquatic life. Like I said, a lot of these are so small that you might see some aquatic insects, but probably be unusual to see fish in these. Observations of flow, because that's key to their federal protection by federal law. and then some characteristics such as width and depth of the flowing water. And we've been taking photographs of the streams. A lot of this has been collected by volunteers. In fact, most of the data started as a project that could be done by GLIFWC staff and family members and friends during the pandemic, because people could go out and collect this data on their own or with their family. Turned into a fairly large database of records of stream flow and photographs of streams. One thing that we found was a little difficult but critical was that we needed exact locations for all those observations and the date for every observation, because we need to tie those observations to weather records. So I guess I'm going to use this as an opportunity to solicit anybody that's interested in getting involved in this effort to document small streams and collect some basic data on them to contact me. I've got my email address on the screen there, and please contact me, and we're going to try to coordinate volunteers and professionals to go out and collect some of this data that we need on small streams. So I want to put out here, I'm sure most of you all are more expert on small streams and trout streams than I am, but I did want to put out some resources here about some of these extremely small streams are poorly documented and kind of fall under the radar in most regulatory situations, but these are some references that talk about the importance of these very small tributaries. They talk about how they're classified and how they contribute to the functioning of the aquatic ecosystem. And because I still got a little bit of time, I'm going to talk about something very different, but might be of interest to people that are interested in fishing. We started looking at how a pipeline right-of-way might affect access to natural resources in Iron County Forest. So we did some modeling looking at well, it's based on the concept that it's now a felony to cross a right-of-way. So the pipeline right-of-way will become legally, you will be committing a felony if you cross the right-of-way once that right-of-way is created for transporting the oil. That creates a barrier across Iron County Forest. It makes it more difficult to access resources. So we looked at how long it would take to get to different parts of the forest with and without the pipeline right-of-way. And what we found was there was an increase of up to, I think it was 87 minutes of increased travel time to get to certain areas in the county forest because of this impassable right-of-way. Now, as far as I know, this trespass law that made it a felony to cross a pipeline right-of-way has never been enforced, but it is on the books. It's been on the books for, I think, about a year and a half now. And it's pretty worrisome to us because it means that any new or even existing right-of-ways pose a real barrier to access to public lands. And with that, I think I will stop. It's sort of just a quick brush over some of the work we've been doing, but we really think that these small tributaries are key to the good functioning of the aquatic ecosystem and maintenance of those downstream water bodies. So I'll be glad to take any questions or comments or whatever else you got. And I will stop sharing, I think.
Oh, John, this is Ken Benoit. So if the Corps doesn't regulate those water crossings, does the Wisconsin DNR have any jurisdiction? If
That's
they're not
interesting.
trout, if they're not trout
Well,
streams?
yeah, the state has a totally different criteria. They have to make a determination if it's a navigable water.
Okay,
And that really is based on whether you can float a kayak or canoe in it. Really different set of criteria for determining whether it's jurisdictional or not. We've argued a little bit with the state about that, but haven't really gotten into the state with it. I think the federal criteria would include a lot more small streams, because some of these streams that we're looking at, well, they might float a boat, but it'd be pretty, I don't know. I'm not sure if they'd meet the state criteria. My guess is if they don't meet the federal criteria, they're probably not protected at all in most cases.
so if they did get the permit and put the pipeline in, would they put in different culverts at these stream locations?
You know, it really, what if they were under federal regulation, it would mean that they would have to follow certain standard procedures when they're crossing those streams. If they're not regulated, then they don't need to do anything. You know, they'd be putting culverts in just so they can get across them, and they don't want to get stuck in them, but they would have no protection.
Okay,
So it'd just be a matter of what would the criteria be for them crossing those streams and protecting them streams from things like erosion or, well, probably be mostly erosion or bank destruction.
Say, John, this is Melissa. Just looking at those maps that show, I think that phrase that view them as the capillaries of the system is really it's a really important understanding, and the cumulative impact of that much. I mean, I'm just wondering how the cumulative impacts, if that feeds into the assessment or the evaluation of the permits. Do you know?
Yeah, you know, for those small crossings, you know, if the Corps thinks they're non-jurisdictional, that it wouldn't be included. You know, I don't think there is any, I have not seen the Corps sort of take the cumulative impact of all those little crossings. You know, no, for these small streams, one crossing is not going to make a bit of difference that you would ever notice downstream. You know, if you cross 50 of them, it probably starts having a significant impact. You know, our position is, Army Corps, why don't you just make sure that they're all taken care of? Get the company to agree to follow the regs on all these stream crossings. It's not that big a deal for a company to do the right thing at these stream crossings. They got to build a stream crossing of some sort anyway. Just put them under the permit so that they're then responsible for doing the right thing. So whether these streams are protected under federal rule or not, in the big picture of things, will not save or cause the doom of Bad River, but we're really pushing for a maximal protection under the existing regulations. I think it would be easier for both the Corps and for enbridge to just say all these crossings are under federal jurisdiction, and we're going to follow the requirements, the best management practices for all these crossings. But we've had multiple meetings with the Corps, and it is a brick wall. They are absolutely not going that direction. So
John, I'm coming new to this whole issue, and I apologize, but what are the strategies, the range of strategies the pipeline will use in crossing, whether they're regulated or not? Is this an elevated pipe? Is this excavated and subterranean? What is it?
you know, it really depends on the water crossing. In some, for these small streams, it would just be putting down a culvert and putting adequate gravel and having erosion control. We've seen some really bad, well, you saw one of the pictures that I showed, some really bad situations where it was just really poor erosion control and caused a whole lot of siltation in adjacent wetlands and streams. If the streams aren't regulated, there's no recourse. If a company starts having real problems with erosion into adjacent wetlands, I guess it could be enforced because of deposition into the wetland. But the different methods for crossing streams, it varies depending. I'm not an expert in that. I should probably not talk too much about it.
Does anyone know whether there's a source that's available that you could research or look into? And are there precedents where this company has gone across property like this, and can it be observed or looked at?
Well, they have their standard practices documents that identify how they're going to cross different streams. They also have standard practices on how they're going to put the pipeline across a stream. There are two issues, well, probably more than two, but two of the big issues is getting equipment across streams and rivers, and the other is getting the pipeline across streams and rivers. So they, in their application, they describe their methodology for those things. So if you want to see those methods, you can look in their application, and we have that stuff available online that I could send you a link. You can download that stuff if you want to look at it. Just let me know.
Yeah, I would like to look at it. So if you could make it available to the chapter, that would be great.
I have a procedural interruption. There are a number of questions in the chat, and I want to make sure that John gets made aware of those questions and gets a chance to answer them.
Okay, I'm looking at the chat now, and I'll start at the top here. Where do you have data loggers over what time period? So we have in the Pinokies, we have data loggers at 6 locations now in the Pinokies in the Tyler Rivers watershed, and also in, I think it's called Devil's Creek, that's along Highway 77. And we put those in. Well, some of them have been in since 2011. Some were put in a couple of years after that. And then we have other data loggers around elsewhere up in Minnesota and over in Michigan. We haven't been putting in data loggers for this pipeline project so much. We're not sure they're going to be the right thing for collecting information for pipeline construction impacts. How does the trespass law affect North Country Trail? I believe the pipeline will cross the trail. That's a curious legal question. I think I don't know. I'm not going to try to answer that. One thing that we've had our legal folks look at crossing the pipeline, and their conclusion was if it's a public right of way, you can cross the pipeline, like a county road, something like a county road or a state road is a public right of way. If you're floating down a river and you're crossing it, that would be allowed. But if it's a trail or a 2-track that's not a publicly designated right of way, it's illegal to cross that right of way. But I don't know about the North Country Trail. I agree that the right of way thing is huge. I almost didn't bring it up because it looks to me like a huge can of worms across the whole state. The trespass law is simply a private property trespass law. And my understanding, although I may be wrong, and you guys probably know it better than I do, is that if you're in a creek or walking along the creek below the high water mark, maybe you can cross private land. And so I assume that's also true with these right of ways. It would have been a simple thing for the legislature to include an exemption for people fishing or hunting, but they did not. So I'm not really sure why not.
Well, and another only similarly connected piece of information is that right now it's trespassing to cross railroad property to access public land. And that has been challenged by a number of groups, and the state has not reversed their position on that. They haven't reversed the law on that. So there's some reason that our current legislature is trying to protect that trespass law.
Yep. You know, that trespass law is a bigger issue than this project, I think. And I think it probably won't go away. I mean, no, as far as I know, nobody's been prosecuted under this. There are modifications made to the trespass law specifically for pipelines. I mean, it includes all energy transportation corridors. But it was introduced by the pipeline industry after the Standing Rock stuff. But it looked to me like it was poorly conceived. So, yeah, and I didn't know about the railroad right-of-way. People cross railroad right-of-ways all the time. That was Bob Rice, is that right, that brought that up?
Yes.
I'd be curious, can you send me anything about that? You know, we're just trying to figure out how to advise tribal members about this.
Yeah, I'll look into what I can find from Wisconsin State Council, because lobbyists that we work with at the state council level have worked on trying to reverse that. And to my knowledge, they haven't successfully gotten the legislature to reverse that. So I'll see what I can find and I'll send it to you, John.
Yeah. And then somebody asked, for those of us who monitored small streams in 2020, should we continue the same protocol as the snow melts in the spring? We're actually trying to put together some protocols with more detail and some things that we think the Corps might find useful. So I'm hoping to get that out in the next month before we get any kind of melt. So yeah, I will be disappointed in us if we don't get something out to sort of beef up our data collection.
So John, on that point, yeah, one of my questions was whether you have a description somewhere of maybe the most useful points that you try to direct volunteers to collect data, and whether it's useful to, say, have someone take a photo with a GPS coordinate, and maybe they wouldn't be able to measure anything, measure widths or flow or anything like that. I can imagine getting a campaign of volunteers together really easily if it seems like that's the data that would actually help the cause.
Yeah, I mean, this last spring and summer, we did have a lot of people out. I think we got about 1,000 photographs of streams. People going out with their smartphones and taking photographs. So we got a lot of good photographs. You know, partly, and it relates to the next question about the Corps being a brick wall. We can't really get from the Corps information about what they would like to see is in the form of data to help them make a decision about a stream. So we're making wild guesses, but in conversations, they talk about stream width, depth, whether it's flowing or not. So the photos in many cases show that stuff. We'd like to maybe have people fill out a form to record some of that.
Mm-hmm.
We thought that simply a photo with a yardstick in the photo would demonstrate that that's a stream and it's 3 feet wide and it's got flowing water. That's all the Corps should need. But the Corps was not did not seem to go for that. They are using a bunch of criteria. They talk about criteria that they're using for determining whether it's jurisdictional or not, that those criteria don't occur in the waters of the US law. So they're using some sort of best professional judgment stuff, which I think probably is not, would not stand legal challenge, but I doubt anybody really wants to sue the Corps over it either.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it. People love to sue the Corps.
Yeah, well, I don't know. The Corps is, yeah.
And on that note, if I can budge in line here, I'm wondering whether trying to argue for the status of various streams to be within federal jurisdiction seems to you guys that know the project better, like probably the most successful route to getting protection? Or is there a sense that this project is going to be overturned under, some other, I mean, not just procedurally, but does this project stand to really crumble under other maybe state law or something else?
You're getting into territory that I can't really talk about. You guys are welcome to talk about that stuff, but that's not,
Well, I guess then from your position, does it seem like the most effective thing to do with your resources is to try and argue for federal jurisdiction of as much of the crossings as you can?
That's one thing that we're arguing, because we think that's something the Corps could easily do. We thought it was. That would add a little bit of protection. We're kind of struggling with, what else can we do to protect resources in the watershed? That's part of, and part of our mandate is not just to protect the resources, but make sure that our members can access those resources. That's when we started looking at the trespass law. We're hoping we might get some traction on the trespass law. I don't know whether that would result in enbridge granting. I don't know where that goes, but it seemed like a big issue to us. There are probably some solutions. It would be easy for the legislature to solve the problem by granting an exemption to people hunting, fishing, and gathering. But we struggle a little bit on these kind of projects because no individual crossing is going to cause a huge impact. It's just when you've got hundreds and hundreds of crossings, you start building up to overall impact, and documenting that and articulating that is difficult. So our thought is if they can provide maximum protection for every little crossing, that gets us a little bit closer to doing the right thing. Now, as far as if you don't want the project, that's a different conversation that, I could have over a beer, but probably not on Zoom.
Sure. Yeah, and sometimes these things just die from, 1,000 cuts, and maybe that's what it is. But it does seem like the trespassing issue is super interesting, I think. And I can't speak to any of the legal questions because we've got very different state laws there, but it does seem like something you could certainly rally other, call them interest groups. Out here, we're very particular about our private land rights, and we could get, like building, like association groups together, real estate groups, people that just want to protect private real estate rights, private property rights. Maybe it isn't necessarily a measurable harm to them, at an individual crossing, but it could certainly be an argument. And they make that kind of argument for, public access to federal lands all the time. So yeah, I think you guys are thinking of really interesting questions.
Yeah, when we realized about this trespass law, it made me think, I doubt anybody that granted a lease to enbridge or a right of way to enbridge really knew what they were getting into, because it means if they walk across their yard that has the pipeline under it, they're committing a felony.
Mhm.
I mean, that's crazy. It's ridiculous, but I think that's what the law says.
And is that law, that the trespass law, been in place for a while?
I think like a year and a half.
Oh, right, you said that. Okay.
So there was a question, can you clarify a bit about the current status of permitting process with WDNR and how it relates to the Army Corps of Engineer permitting process? So I'm glad you asked that. The Army Corps, we had a meeting with them on Friday. They said, I mean, there are two things that we are really arguing with them about. One is this, where they determine they have no jurisdiction. They put out these lists of water bodies they say they don't have jurisdiction over and therefore are not protected. They said they're not going to be releasing any more of those lists in the short term, and they would not be making any decisions until after the WDNR puts out an EIS. So the Army Corps is kind of waiting on the DNR and the DNR's EIS. So we're hoping that that's kind of gonna, the EIS, nothing big will happen until that EIS comes out. The DNR has said they've revised their schedule. They were going to release a draft EIS in February. They're now talking May for a draft EIS. We still think that's grossly unrealistic. We're having meetings about once a month with the WDNR, and they're making some progress, and they've got some sort of framework for the EIS, but as far as we can tell, they have not made very much progress on the EIS. So may come out in May, but my guess is more likely sometime in the summer. The draft EIS will happen, and then the Corps will take that information and use that to make some decisions. So I hope that helps a little bit. I don't know if there, is that the last question there? So,
John.
Yeah.
Have you worked with or interacted with the Superior Rivers Watershed Association and their process for monitoring streams? And
yeah, you know, we have, we did in particular in relation to the GTAC mining proposal. I mean, that's the group that used to be called the Bad River Watershed Association, right? Yep. So most recently, we sort of lost touch with them a little bit. Actually, I think they lost some administrative, I mean, they sort of didn't have a structure for a little while, didn't they? I thought they lost some people and were kind of dormant for 6 months or a year, but anyway.
John, they're fully functional, and there are people that would be good for you to be in touch with.
Yep.
And I will send you in an email some emails for staff members. They have a new executive director, and they have a person who's involved in data collection, and I'll send that stuff to you.
Yeah, okay. And you know, I know they do a lot of good work. We just sort of lost touch with them a little bit.
I've done some stream monitoring with them, and they have a protocol. They have a sheet you follow. All the volunteers use the same protocol, and maybe something not necessarily that involved, but that might work well for your volunteers.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because recreating the wheel is always a lot of work. So I will look into getting hold of that and seeing if it would work. One thing that I've found is that a lot of monitoring is for streams that actually have water in them. And some of these streams that we look at don't have water in them. So, you know, there's no point in looking for aquatic insects probably if there's no water. But probably what we need is some real good aquatic biologists to really help us plan this. We're sort of more hydrologist kind of folks, and
John, not to interrupt too much on this, but the one thing that the Watershed Association may be able to contribute. So the conversation has to do with road crossings and just in general crossings of streams, because they do a lot of that.
Yeah, didn't they do a culvert project maybe? Or is that somebody else?
They've
They
done
were-
quite a few culvert projects.
Yeah. So I know there are an awful lot of collapsed, walking around Iron County Forest, there are a lot of collapsed culverts on those forest roads.
Hey, John, this is Kylie and Travis's wife. So
Right.
I've been listening in, and I had a question about, like, these are all, like, really ephemeral streams, it sounds like.
Well,
But
careful, don't use that. It's. if
oh,
they're
is that a
ephemeral-
technical term? Sorry, I'm an archaeologist, not a hydrologist.
Well, the problem is the lawyers try to use ecological terms and so they've they've redefined ephemeral.
Oh,
So-
goodness. Okay. So, but what the angle of my question was, they don't flow more than a few weeks now, but I know that some of the climate change models, there's drier possibilities and there's wetter possibilities. In a wetter climate change scenario, do these flow more of the year and then pose a greater potential risk for sedimentation and, God forbid, contamination if there's a break in the line?
Yeah, we would be thrilled if the Army Corps would look at something like that, but that's kind of, I don't think they're real forward thinking. But I think, when in terms of climate change, what we're thinking, one of the biggest effects might be big storm events that create erosion problems.
Oh, definitely.
And so we've been bringing that up in a lot of our reviews for different projects about these storm events causing erosion problems and how standard erosion control procedures probably aren't adequate anymore.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
definitely. I work for Apostle Islands, and I can tell you we are having a lot of problems with that already. It's not coming, it's here.
And then, I just want to touch on the ephemeral and the flow. If you read through the Waters of the US rule that came out in June, it sounds from reading that if you had a stream flowing for 2 weeks, that would be more than adequate to qualify as a water of the US. We're trying to document longer periods just to sort of be extra certain. But the wording is a stream that flows more than in immediate response to precipitation. Well, to me, immediate response to precipitation is either while it's raining or maybe a few hours or a day or two after. But something that flows for 2 weeks does not sound to me like something flowing in immediate response to precipitation. But I'm sure there are going to be lawyers arguing about that. What does that phrase mean? So if we figure if it flows for 2 weeks, we think should be classified as an intermittent stream. Intermittent streams are under federal jurisdiction, and but we're trying to document longer periods just to be sure.
This is Phyllis Hasbrook, and I'm with the Wisconsin Safe Energy Alliance, and we're against the pipeline. And I had a question. So you keep on saying about ACEs and Army Corps isn't interested in this, but I'm thinking how Biden has said that every department needs to take climate change into consideration or something like that. And I'm just wondering, is there anything we could do or send letters or something and say, hey, your Army Corps isn't really responding yet to that. Here's an example of where they're not thinking about the climate change effects of putting in another pipeline for dirty oil.
I think it would be, well, and I should apologize. Somebody asked the question whether I thought it would be different. The Army Corps would act different under the Biden administration. I think ultimately maybe there would be some movement towards more protective implementation of Army Corps regulations. Letters, it's really gonna, I mean, certainly the Army Corps was not enforcing anything they didn't absolutely have to over the last 4 years. We're hoping things will get better, but you know, we've been working across the table from the Army Corps for 20, 25 years. They are a big, slow moving agency, which at times is very frustrating. So, I mean, that can be good sometimes, but I would not expect a quick change in the Army Corps' behavior and approach to regulation. Maybe, you know, after 4 or 8 years, we'd see some change.
Okay, thank you.
But letters sure would be good. I'm trying to think. I mean, that would be, I mean, it's part of the military, which makes it a little bit weird. It's not part of interior. So, you know, the colonel, there's a colonel in St. Paul that is in charge of the St. Paul district. He's like the absolute power over what happens. The best response we've ever gotten from the Corps is by meeting with the colonel or communicating with the colonel. So that might be a route. I don't know who the colonel is now, or, you know, whether he'd be inclined to more vigorous enforcement or not.
Thanks.
I think maybe we need to have the colonel up here for a trout stream extravaganza followed by a fish fry.
You kind of, I think that sort of thing, our experience, these colonels are often people that have worked their way through the military. Some of them have, you know, fresh back from Afghanistan or who knows where. They're just regular folks. In many cases, we've had really good interactions with colonels. They change every 2 or 3 years, so it's a sort of ongoing process. But that idea, I think, if you could get them to come, I think it would be a great thing. It certainly gets the attention of the lower staff because they know they have to do whatever the colonel says.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments for John?
Well, I really appreciate the suggestions people made, and I definitely will follow up with Superior Watershed Association or Superior Rivers Watershed.
It is Superior Rivers Watershed Association,
Yep.
and I am going to send you an email with contact information for Alex Farber, who's the executive director, and Kevin Brewster, who has done the road crossing stuff.
Yeah.
The culvert stuff.
Yeah, I know, Kevin. So, yeah, this
And
year has been kind of weird because
I texted the Trout Unlimited State Council chair to get information on the railroad crossing, and I will get that to you as soon as he's able to round that up for me.
okay. I mean, normally we run into those folks in the field and we have a like an annual meeting to talk about work that's being done in the Pinocchies, but that just hasn't happened this last year.
Thank you, John.
Well, thank you. And yeah, just send me an email if you want to work on collecting the stream data, and we'll try to get some more formalized data collection set up by end of March at the latest.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And
Thanks.
John, you know, we may be able to, that might be something that our chapter members, there may be chapter members that may want to help with that effort as well. So that's something that we can, you know, we can share with the broader membership, because we weren't able to really do any, you know, on the ground restoration project work last year. And we're hoping to be able to do some of that this year, but you know, it's still a I'll turn my video back on. Hi. It's still, we don't have an itinerary yet. We're starting to gather those ideas, and it depends on how things go as far as COVID, but this is a project that can be done. So we're looking for ways to engage our membership in, since in the absence of being able to gather together. So
Yep. And if people have other ideas, we're kind of winging this, trying to figure out what data to collect and how to collect it. Somebody suggested using a drone to identify what streams had flowing water. That's one idea that we think we might want to pursue. If people have other ideas on, documenting stream flow in thousands of little teeny streams is kind of a difficult undertaking. So,
in my experience in participating in somewhat similar efforts, and certainly Try to Limit It often engages as an amicus to court cases like this. In fact, I think we worked on one that defined, the lawyers were, defining ephemeral versus intermittent for, I don't know, a sturgeon issue, which isn't even a cold water fish. But I think to some extent, no data is bad data, in the sense that, yes, you might need good data for a certain claim, but if you have hundreds of people collecting photos, that have dates and coordinates at minimum, I mean, there's a lot to relay there. There's a lot of, it's just, maybe not scientific, but there's still, that kind of speaks for itself in terms of a movement. So I could see, I know a couple of teachers back there that could probably get on board with that kind of issue or what have you. But, if there's someone that did some really JV mapping, like I do JV mapping, and I just, barely can put a dot on a map, but they ended up putting dots where they saw, water flowing, above an inch or something like that in May, June, July, things like that, that you might be able to at least communicate something strongly, where maybe it's not necessarily, data that fits into a definition so much as it is like a greater showing.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll get back to a different definition of, I almost dread it if the Biden administration tries to redefine waters of the US again.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll get back to something that is sort of more ecological based. I mean, I actually think the definition that the Trump administration created, that includes water coming from snow melt or snowpack melt, is really good for us in the northern half of Wisconsin, because there is a definite snowpack and it melts for weeks and weeks. So I think in a lot of parts of the country, it's probably a really terrible definition. But I mean, the problem is, I think that changing definitions means the Corps and other agencies just fall back onto what they've always done, which is sort of professional judgment, which is, better than nothing. But
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked on that. But I appreciate, we thought photos and dates, times, and coordinates were going to be compelling to the Corps. We sent them like 300 photos with exactly that information of flowing streams. They have no way of mapping that. The Army Corps staff don't have GIS capabilities anymore. They lost that. I don't know how they function, how do they use data if they don't have the resources? So we're trying to figure out something that is so compelling and so easy for them to digest that they have to agree, but that may not be possible.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you for joining our meeting.
Well, thank you.
And,
Maybe I'll have to join you guys. It sounds, I really should, because it's a good excuse to get out and do stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be awesome.
Yeah.
It's
So-
easy to join, just Google tu.org. And I can, but no, that would be great. And we'll stay in touch on this anyway.
Yep.
And yeah, so thank you. And
Well, and I have to say, you and several other people I see that are on this call were really helpful with collecting data this last year. So thanks a bunch on that.
Yeah, we'll have to get you out doing some fly fishing.
That really intimidates me. I have a hard time even holding a fishing rod for more than 5 minutes, but fly fishing, whew, that looks intimidating.
It's northern
not.
Wisconsin. There's no reason to be intimidated at all.
Well, I'll tell you, I know some great places with
But I do
lots of
it.
trout. I've never caught them, but phew, a couple streams that I work on are just teeming with trout. So I'll trade you some lessons for some good spots.
Deal.
John, this is Kylene again. Rob talked Travis into taking him out fishing. I bet you could get him to do the same.
Yeah, my son would get really jealous if I actually caught some trout.
That
Well,
might
it's
be
good to
reason-
make him jealous.
Probably right.
So, and John, I'm going to connect with you separately because I do have an idea for your for the data collection, a
Okay.
crowdsourcing idea. So that might be a way to go. But
Okay.
I'll connect with you separately on that.
Well, thanks, everybody, and I look forward to further conversations.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, I think that concludes the meeting.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Bye.
It turned out really well.
Yes, I think so.
I like it.
And it looked like you were recording.
Oh, yeah, and I should stop recording now.